The Rockefeller Institute and Rockefeller-owned vaccine makers had stockpiles of vaccine. So they drummed up the largest vaccination campaign in U.S. history using the fear that these soldiers brought the flu from Spain. Eleanor McBean claimed that those not vaccinated didn't die. The Rockefellers and their compatriot oligarchs had banks in at least several European countries and pushed their propaganda for vaccines in that continent, stating that the sickness was due to a flu the soldiers must have picked up from Spain. In another book, Dr. McBean and 3 fellow authors, including Pacifica radio host Ida Honoroff, countered the oligarchs' propaganda with one final example.
The doctors didn't want this massive vaccine disease to reflect on them, so they agreed among themselves to call it Spanish influenza. Spaniards knew the flu didn't originate in their country. 20 million died of that flu epidemic worldwide, and it seemed to be almost universal, or as far as the vaccination reached. Greece and a few other countries which did not accept the vaccines were the only ones which were not hit by the flu.
Other sources backed Dr. Eleanor McBean's claims. Gary Coles, MD, a doctor and weekly columnist for the Duluth Reader, wrote an article with former federal attorney Kevin Barry, who had written a book about Rockefeller Medical Institute vaccines starting the Spanish flu. They cited this journal article on an Australian study finding the effects of the virus in and of themselves did not cause most or even many of the deaths during the pandemic. The study said medical experts and published data from the 1918 period suggest that most deaths were caused by secondary bacterial pneumonia. Dr. Coles and Barry said that by 1919, the U.S. Army ballooned to 6 million men, with 2 million men being sent overseas. They cited a National Institute of Health report stating bacterial pneumonia killed at least 92.7% of the pandemic victims. These authors further cited this NIH archived article stating that the military used experimental vaccines on the soldiers as a prevention measure, and stated these were the Rockefeller Institute's experimental bacterial meningococcal vaccine made in horses that were also sent to England, Belgium, Italy, and other countries that were the real killer of tens of millions. As further evidence, they cited the example of a 1918 doctor's report on the planned 3 doses of the bacterial meningitis vaccines injected in over 4,700 men between January and June of 2018. But over 1,000 men were not there for the 3rd dose. They referenced PBS's American Experience as also citing Fort Riley, Kansas as a starting place for the first wave of the 1918 influenza. PBS even referred to it as the so-called Spanish influenza. Coles cited PBS as saying that 100 men a day were entering the infirmary during that vaccination period. With Fort Riley duplicated at Army bases across the U.S. and in European countries, by July, the influenza of 1918 had left its mark globally, as tens of thousands had died.